Wir haben nicht so viel Zeit, also gib direkt Gas. Viel Spaß.
Translation wasn't working.
I said go. I said go.
I'm good. Cool. All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jason Bigler. I'm the head of product for Google's display ads business in Europe. I'm going to talk to you about some somewhat repetitive things you've heard today, but hopefully a couple of new things as well. I'm really going to talk about both the ecosystem at large, but also a buy-side and a sell-side component to that, and also probably announce a few things that, that you may or may not actually have heard yet. But let's first talk about the obvious. Advertising will continue to change. And it is the obvious, because I think it's actually changing at a velocity that none of us can actually keep up with. It's happening very quickly. There's been major consumer behavioral changes. I've actually seen a bit of research on this recently, where consumers actually, if you think about it, show of hands, who actually owns a tablet? Yeah, about 60% of you. So the research would say that 80% of you dual screen. So you sit down and watch TV at night, and you've got the tablet open, and you're doing something else, whatever that might be. So that's big. Probably 50% of you wake up in the morning and check your social network. You don't have to raise your hands about that one. But 75% of you then take your phone into the toilet in the morning as well. And you certainly don't have to raise your hand on that one. But maybe look beside you and say, that's pretty disgusting. You should really stop doing that. So consumers, just with these devices, it's becoming an attachment to them. And as a result of that, you've got format innovation that's occurring. You've got experiences that they're actually expecting out of these devices. I mean, in a mobile in particular, last year was the year we saw mobile devices outship PCs, first time in history. And the prediction is that next year, mobile devices will actually be the largest web content consuming devices, outpacing PCs as well. So that's massive. If you're a publisher in this room and you're not thinking about mobile as a core part of your strategy, please. It's something you really have to embrace, because it's happening faster than you think it is. YouTube. So mobile advertising obviously is an overlay to users who are transitioning these devices, but video is another big one. Video, so in YouTube, for example, I think this is pretty fascinating. Every second, there is an hour of content uploaded onto YouTube. Like, the velocity that video content is being generated by users, it's being created being uploaded in this environment, it's astounding. It actually keeps on getting bigger and bigger month over month. So you've got these new formats, you have these new devices, you've got consumer behavioral shifts. It's actually created a lot of complexity, probably more complexity. It's gotten more complex to roll out. For example, a mobile campaign, the operational costs to do so are actually higher than a traditional display campaign. And you've also got a ton of different solutions providers that are vying to own some part of that ecosystem. And so I'm going to talk to you about why I think that resonates with the platform. The platform actually only becomes more relevant in this more complex world. It's the single measurement currency that allows you to anticipate that audience journey, looking at data, whether it's your own or it's third-party data that's being ingested, delivering across all those devices and measuring across all those devices as well. In real time, certainly, but instead of thinking about real time and RTB and all these, there's probably 100 acronyms that have been thrown at you today. I want you to think about it as winning moments that matter. That's what ultimately everybody's trying to do here. You're trying to hit a consumer at the right time, in the right mindset. As a buyer, as a seller, you're trying to sell that. You're trying to package that up so it's actually relevant to the buyer. But that's basically what we're doing here. And doing this in real time, I think, is certainly a means to that end. But it's the only way you're going to be able to do it at the scale that you need to be thinking about how to do it. So we believe that real time is going to be massive. I mean, it's already huge in the United States. It's growing rather well in the UK. And My boss, Neil Mohan, says this will be 50% of the ad spend by 2015. And whether or not you believe that, we think that there's going to be just a tectonic shift in the amount of media that's being bought in a real-time environment. And in Germany, we have a long way to go. I think the estimate was around 4 or 5% is what's being bought programmatically now. But all predictions point to that number growing exponentially, probably at 100% year over year. And so think about that. I heard some pessimistic comments earlier in the day about the relevancy of RTB, but this is where the buyers are going, and the buyers vote with their wallets. And you're going to be able to make, as a seller, you're going to be able to make a lot of money embracing this as opposed to actually fighting it. It's really something that you have ultimate flexibility in what inventory you can put into the RTB environment, how frequently it's in there. You can dial it back, you can dial it up. And we found that in a couple of case studies, at least here in Europe even, that whenever you pit exchange-based buying in combination with the stuff you're selling directly, exchange-based buying actually delivers a higher eCPM 25% of the time. That's a real case study where a publisher here actually executed that with dynamic allocation on our sell-side platform. But as far as opportunities go, I want to talk about kind of the buy-side perspective. I'll talk about the sell-side after that, and then some things we're doing specifically for publishers that I think will be meaningful also to the buyers. So we are, and as you've heard countless times today, we believe in a platform play. We believe that a platform will deliver the most value over the long run simply because you need that common measurement currency. And we think that there are 3 specific ways in which the platform delivers. You've got workflow efficiency, just helping everybody work faster, better, easier. You've got the performance that it actually helps drive with the ability to deduplicate across all these different channels. And then you've got the ability to differentiate. And I'll get into these points in a bit more detail here. But I mean, the traditional media planning process, as I pointed out earlier, has often been a result, well, it's often costed about 25% of the media budget in terms of time invested just to get it executed on. And versus television, which is more about 5%. And they're 2 very different things, and one's easier to execute upon. I think we've built a lot of complexity that has made digital better than television, and so inherently it should be a bit tougher to execute upon. But this particular component is something that a platform can drive because it standardizes your operations across your entire organization. For performance, this is a no-brainer. If it doesn't perform, you're not going to use it. But again, the common measurement currency allows you to make better decisions on your media plans, leveraging your data, whether it's first-party data or it's third-party data that you've integrated, to be able to precision target those and frequency cap across. Bind it in real time, I've talked about. But more importantly is engaging the consumer. More data, more real time, gives you a better chance of putting the right message in front of the right user at the right time, and to create ads that are meaningful, that the consumers would actually call useful information. So I mean, pretty much everybody here, I assume, has bought something on Amazon or has downloaded a song from iTunes. Those recommendations you get for books or for products, other albums that users have bought, I mean, those are ads at the end of the day. Those are ads, and you don't think about them as ads because it's useful information. And useful information is what we have to push toward in order to get consumers the balance of the consumer value proposition against everything that we're doing that you're doing, certainly, on the data collection front and how that relates to what gets rendered in the ads themselves. And then finally, we do have an open platform. I think there's lots of rumors and hearsay that would say that we don't have an open platform, but we do. We have partnered with third-party providers on the data front, on the workflow front. We've done it on the buy side and sell side. We've had customers develop their own tools that plug into our system. Way back in the early days of DoubleClick, we were one of the first companies to have a legitimately published API that you could extract reporting data out of, or you could push data into the system itself. So we were a pioneer as far as that goes, and we haven't stopped being open. We still have customers using these APIs and building their own proprietary, differentiated technology, operations, and insight tools based on a unified platform. And I think ultimately, and some of this was touched on throughout the day, but ultimately, whether you're building your own bidder or whether you're building your own workflow tool, these are things that you should do. If it makes sense for your business, we have a bunch of tools that allow you to execute upon that and use the blueprinted solution when it makes sense, build your own when it makes sense. That's kind of our style here, and I think you should ultimately look for that in every platform. And I don't think I know a platform that's completely closed, but this is something that I would like to actually see more of you do. I'd like to see more differentiation, more investment in technology that is built on top of these systems, as opposed to relying on the systems themselves to do the work. So publishers, very similar. Although publishers, there's really one big goal, and that's how do I maximize revenue? It's revenue, revenue, revenue for publishers. So how do you do that? How do you capture new opportunities, whether they're different deal types or different channels? And efficiency plays into both sides, most certainly. But last year, I think publishers have been generally happy with the direction that we're going. You've got a great vision, you got a great platform. We like the new investment in the new version of DFP. But they said, you guys should take a look at this company called AdMeld. You might learn a thing or two from them. And so, lo and behold, an acquisition is consummated back in December, actually, and basically is a signal that we are investing in yield management. We think yield management is really the next big thing that is a good platform play. How do you actually effectively manage different relationships and yield across those relationships? And we thought AdMeld was the best in the business. Forrester would say they were the best in the business. We think the people were the best. And I think with this, as far as AdMeld goes, I'll talk a bit about what we're doing roadmap-wise in a minute, but we're investing in it. We've added people, we've added sales and service, and I think toward the end of the year you're going to see some really cool stuff come out of here. But the roadmap that we're doing, at least initially, is we're going to build something called AdX Connect that's actually coming out fairly soon. But the ability for buyers' bids in AdX to be ported into the AdMeld ecosystem, the AdMeld client ecosystem, so they can actually tap into that demand is actually a very quick win we're going to implement fairly soon. There's some DFP integration level work that we're actually going to pipe the eCPM of not just AdMeld, but all the network partners into the DFP reporting UI. So that'll actually represent a really interesting yield report. There's a good amount of investment that's happening on the technology infrastructure side as well. That will mainly be around scale and continue to actually support AdMeld customers individually, but also later in the year that I can't talk specifically about just yet, but you can think about it as this new vision of a combined yield management offering within the Ad Exchange solution is really going to come to fruition, and we're pretty excited about it because I think there's a lot of synergies between these products and technologies that are going to benefit everybody. So let's talk about a few specific announcements. I know that for publishers in particular, we've historically had either it's directly sold or it's put into the exchange. The direct deals functionality that we've come up with here is, it's a fancy way of saying first look, but it's actually a way to operationalize this really simply and easily, where you can create a layer above the auction that is a guarantee for a buyer, and the ability to do this at scale within the native UI of this application. But to be able to give a buyer, at likely a higher rate, of course, the ability to get a first look view at that impression and decide whether or not they would like it, and if not, then it would go into the exchange from there. So that's a deal type we're going to support that has already been happening out there in the marketplace, but it's something that's been absent in our offering that we're going to be rolling out. But the ability to set the same restrictions and to leverage all of AdX's controls and billing that's already native into that application as well. So that's That's out, but what we're rolling out in Q2 is a marketplace around that. So actually taking that concept and allowing a publisher to put together, package up their inventory, solicit offers from multiple buyers, negotiate, execute, basically without having to pick up a phone or send an email. It's actually all natively done within this UI. And that's actually rolling out in Q2, and we think that's actually that will be a good demand source for publishers. And again, supporting new and different deal types outside of the traditional. It either goes in the auction, you bid on it, or you buy it directly. And then this one we announced, although I'm not sure how many people know about it, but historically, as far as the ad exchange was concerned, it wasn't notoriously very ad network friendly. Right? You could only put in your owned and operated inventory, and if it was non-owned and operated, if it was represented, this was a policy issue. This is a policy that Google had in terms of what types of inventory could be placed in here. So this is a complete shift. This is the ability to put non-owned and operated inventory into the ad exchange as a part of your AdX account, and to manage those partners, to give you some really good management feature functionality, but to just expand the reach of what you can actually represent within the ad exchange itself. And so this is both a philosophical change in terms of like what we used to think, and so a complete change for this year, and something to think about, especially I think in this market where there's a lot more network players and where publishers have network extensions to their business. So that is the last of the announcements. What I will say is that we're big time invested in kind of coming up with this you'll see if it sort of blows into a puzzle, like getting the puzzle pieces together here. But there's a value proposition to having a solution on both sides. There is not the conflict that some would imply that there is by having a solution on both sides. There are very natural network externalities that occur whenever you can create workflow efficiencies between how something is bought, how it is sold, and the types of relationships and deals that can be created in this ecosystem. But most importantly, I get back to that common thread of a common measurement currency. If you stitch together multiple solutions, they will ultimately only talk to each other to a certain extent. And you're going to find this in the rollout of DMPs, where you've got a different DMP provider, you've got a different DSP provider, you've got a different third-party ad-serving provider, and every step along the way is going to result in cookie loss for all these segments that you're trying to target. Probably 10%, kind of like redirects, right? Every 302 is one further away from the truth. Same thing with cookies and segments. And so think about this. Think about it as a platform as an enabler that you can actually build value and differentiate, whether you build your own technology, whether you operationalize differently, but that you get benefits from playing within this ecosystem with the sellers that are involved in it, and certainly for the sellers, the buyers, and focus on making money. That's really what we all want to do at the end of the day. So that's what I have to present to you. I think I did it in 15 minutes or so, and I'm happy to answer questions.
We have 5 minutes for questions. 5 minutes, so you have to have questions. Die ersten Leute gehen schon, statt Fragen zu stellen.
I actually have two questions. One concerns the direct deals marketplace. Will there be an API for that to hook it up to other systems? And the second question is, what are the downsides of using AdX to access AdMeld inventory as opposed to a direct connection to AdMeld?
Well, to answer your second question first, I don't think there's any downsides. It's basically it's an initial integration to to get some synergies built between the two technology offerings. Because as you know, when you acquire a company, it takes a fair bit of time to even organize yourselves around how you're going to integrate the technology. But this was somewhat of a no-brainer.
So it's the first step to turning AdMeld off, or what are you saying?
No. So it's the first step to a combined yield management solution where you're going to have yield management functionality you can choose to utilize and choose not to utilize other things. Still maintain the flexibility of whether you want to. We believe that it map it to your business and not taking away kind of the transparency, like the advertiser level transparency, the bid transparency you would expect in AdMeld, incorporating that, embracing that as part of AdX, but deciding how do you want to execute on a private exchange, for example. Kind of using the technology infrastructure that really makes Google great, but compartmentalizing that based on your own business needs. So AdMeld, eventually, there will be a combined product because that's how acquisitions work. We ultimately want to build synergies between the two companies, and that's ultimately going to be one of them. It's just like with DoubleClick, we're sort of in the last throes of moving the last of the technology off of the old DoubleClick infrastructure and onto the Google technology stack. Eventually, you do those things, but you don't rush it. You do it very deliberately and in a way that does not take away from the value that the product actually is currently delivering for those customers. So that's that. Direct deals, APIs generally follow the feature release. So it's our strategy to make sure that APIs are available at some time interval afterwards. Sometimes they roll out at the same time, but usually it's like 3 to 6 months afterwards. So, yeah.
Weitere Fragen? Further questions? Übrigens, ihr könnt die Fragen in Deutsch stellen, das ist dann vielleicht nicht so unangenehm und ich würde mich lächerlich machen und sie versuchen zu übersetzen. So you can ask your questions in German. I'll be the person that tries to translate them. Casper.
So, I think you have a point. I think if you bring the marketers and the publishers together and you pool the data that you could get from both sides, you would actually increase value creation. But who then decides on the value capture from one side and the other side? Is this then Google?
Well, I think it's up to the business. So the arrangement that occurs, because I think in some cases, a publisher's data is going to bring more value to the equation than an advertiser's data, and vice versa. But that ultimately, if you looked at data in isolation and said, like, how can I, as a publisher, how can I monetize that? And that the more data you bring to an ad impression, the curve goes upward in terms of the eCPM you actually derive from that. And likewise, the advertiser, because they're willing to pay a higher rate for more precision around that. So in this world, I think both actually benefit. At least for some period of time, both will benefit. And that the question will be how much in concert will the two sides be willing to work with one another? Like how much data sharing can there be? How much trust will there be ultimately? Because if you've got buy-side data that is part of their site, it could be a mixture of first party, it could be like really good reg data that's been anonymized and implies like certain predispositions for high quality products versus cheaper products, and sell side, which is like bringing on really good context and content consumption behavior that is designed to kind of hit that user at that right moment in time with that offer. It's kind of a moving target between who gets better value out of that, but ultimately, if the advertiser hits the right user and and actually gets that conversion and paid a fair rate for it to the publisher, then both ultimately win, right?
Sure, but you're saying to the publisher, I will maximize your revenue.
Yep.
You're then saying to several demand-side partners, we will be your real-time bidding engine that will tell you what this impression is worth. So now, I have to sit back and reflect a little bit as the demand-side player and saying, how is Google now effectively deciding on the value capture that happens for the two different parts of the value chain, and how does that really rhyme with the maximized revenue promise towards the publishers.
Yeah, you said it, right? Like publishers setting a floor price for their inventory that they can change, and they'll ultimately be able to dynamically change as well. And a buyer is saying how much they want to pay for this impression, and a buyer will start off and say, well, I want to pay as low a possible rate as I can, but that ultimately more competition drives up the price because there is a difference between somebody's willing to pay and what they should pay, right? And so that's where that gap gets bridged. Frankly, it's not a question of whether we're deciding. Like ultimately, the marketplace is deciding. The ad exchange is an agnostic engine that operates on a second price auction. And so it's up to the buyer to value the seller's inventory and for the seller to kind of manage the demand that's coming in and say, well, is my floor price too low? Can I move it upward? Can I make some changes here? Can I create private ecosystems where I've kind of compartmentalized a set of advertisers that really value these types of user segments that only I possess? It's a tough question to answer because you've got multiple situations that can actually benefit both, but you imply there's a condition where at some point there's a loser, right? And sure, right? There can be that scenario that actually exists, but this is, in a second price auction, is a very agnostic solution. The marketplace, the sellers and the buyers are ultimately defining the value and like where that value goes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Weitere Fragen? Further questions? In the back.
How did I know I'd get most of the questions?
You're provoking the most questions the whole day. Nobody had that many questions.
So what do you think is a fair share handling the whole value chain? I mean, like in today, if a transaction would be involved in Invite, double-click AdX, and AdMelt, it would be like 50 plus. Is that a fair share for the future for Google? Or?
So wait, you're talking about revenue share? Or do you?
Yeah, like if an advertiser spends like €1, what would then end up at the publisher?
It's a good question. I know what. I think everybody knows what fair is in today's market. I don't know what happens to pricing over time, right? As more and more scale gets behind it, we all know what happens to pricing as it evolves. I will say this: I think that what was talked about in the last panel, the idea of like a publisher trading desk or publishers becoming buyers and beginning to do audience extension themselves, there's a case to be made for, well, if you're operating within a technology platform that is taking, 20% of the sell side and 10% on the buy side, and then there's a DMP transaction that occurs in there. I don't know. I can't answer that question, like where I eventually think it's going to go. I mean, but there is a case to be made that if you are using a piece of technology to conduct a transaction, you should be able to do that at a single cost and not a combined loaded cost. Thanks for that question, though.
So, yeah, actually, my question is, of course, if you combine all these companies you acquired in the last 1-2 years, and if it's then one fixed share, like, I mean, the AdX was like 32 AdWords, AdSense, more or less, and now if you implement AdMeld and Invite, you just add on your margin in total. Yeah.
Well, you're implying that we would make it additive, so I think that's an assumption you're making. So I mean, think about it as brokering a transaction. Like you can broker it, one time on each side ultimately. And historically, that's been the case, right? Even from the DFA, DFP days, and will be on the exchange days as well. But I'm a little bit of a fortune teller, but I'm not like that far out. Yeah.
Okay. No more questions. Just get the signal. There's no more questions. There's a coffee break now. 15-minute coffee break. Thank you, Jason.
All right, thanks, everyone. Thank you.